Hey, Matt, good to see you. How are you? Doing well?
I'm doing great, Glenn. How are you doing?
I'm also well. Congratulations on another genuinely blockbuster story. But before we get into the content of it, let me just ask you. You're appearing on my show to talk about it. We just spent, as you heard, a good amount of time covering both the context of it and the revelations. I'm sure you're deluged with requests from all the Sunday shows like Face the Nation and Meet the Press and CNN and the New York Times to share with them your findings as well. How are you managing all of these many media requests?
I did get one from CBS, oddly enough, but I was very excited to talk to you because it occurred to me today that I heard about Hamilton 68 from you. I remember us having a conversation because I was asking about this sort of new union about of sort of Bush conservatives and Clintonian Democrats, and you were the one who pointed me in the direction of Jamie Fly and Laura Rosenberger all those years ago. So you were the first person I remembered who wrote about this issue. I wrote about it after you, but I think you were the first person to catch on to this.
Well, part of it was because they were continuously claiming that my reporting was actually the byproduct of Russian propaganda and was being pushed by Russian bots, even though I could see that that was a lie. But also because, as I said, what was interesting to me at the time was you could see this emergence of this new alliance where we were told before the election, oh no, don't worry, Democrats still hate Bill Kristol and David Frum and all the people they spent years calling war criminals in the neocon world. This is just a temporary alliance of convenience. Once you stop Donald Trump, they're going to go back to hating each other. And you could immediately see that this is going to be an enduring alliance. So that was why I paid so much attention to Hamilton 68, and also because it did seem clear to me at the time that Pierre Omidyar, who was funding The Intercept, was funding multiple Bill Kristol projects under the guise of Never Trumpers. And so I thought it would be both fun and my obligation to use Pierre Omidyar's platform that he was funding
Tweak him
to
a little
attack
bit.
other groups that he was funding, kind of like the U.S. funds both sides of a civil war. Now, let me ask you, the first tweet you published, the way you kind of titled this, and you've, I think, done a very good job of avoiding overstatement and exaggeration and hyperbole when reporting these stories. You compared what you were about to reveal to Jason Blair, who was the disgraced New York Times reporter who got fired because it was discovered that he had just outright fabricated and plagiarized all kinds of stories and quotes. Why do you think that, having looked at all this, that comparison is justified?
I think this is. I mean, I did think about it. It was a question on my mind. Is this an appropriate comparison? But this is a scam. I mean, there's no way around it. It's not the same thing as Stephen Glass or Jason Blair, who invented both stories and bylines for different reasons, because they had personal problems. There were all kinds of things going on in those instances. This was consciously an effort to take organic groups of just basically ordinary people, a lot of them kind of Trump supporters with low impact followings, and describe their real conversations as Russian influenced. So there is no way, looking at this list, that there can be an innocent explanation for what they did. They had to have known that this was a fraud. And if you look at the public explanation, Laura Rosenberger saying, "Oh, we can't release the names because the Russians will immediately recall their agents," right? Well, I'm talking to these people this week, right? And it's people like Joe Loria from Consortium, and Dennis Michael Lynch, who was a Newsmax guy, and there are all these real people all over the place. It's very obvious that they're not Russian agents. So I think this is actually, in many ways, worse than the Blair story, because it's almost like a Blair story to scale, right? Like they took a fake story, but then they kind of mechanized it and made it into an algorithmic thing.
So I recall at the time that, that was one of the obvious questions about this methodology was, look, you say that you have a hold of 600 accounts that you have determined are Kremlin linked or Kremlin associated. And that's how you determine which stories are being pushed by the Kremlin, by looking at whatever stories they are promoting or hashtags they are promoting. That's how you then decree which stories are being promoted by the Kremlin. So the obvious question was, let's see that list. Like, who have you just, what's the whole foundation for all of this? I remember demands that they reveal that, and they came up with these completely laughable excuses for why they had to keep it secret. You have now seen the list, right? And I assume that list comes from the reverse engineering you said that Twitter did. Basically, they were requesting that these people be banned, and Twitter was able to be put together this list. Is that the list that you saw, or did you actually see the list itself from Hamilton 68?
No, I saw the reverse engineered list, but it's pretty clear that it's the list.
Right. So talk. Go ahead. Yeah. So tell me, aside from the couple names you just described, who was on this list? The whole purpose of this list was, this is the foundation of who are Kremlin agents. Presumably, they should have been Russian, since she was saying, if we reveal the names, the Russians are going to shut them down. She strongly implied, Laura Rosenberger, a senior national security official in the Democratic Party, that the Russians had direct control over these people. What did you find when looking at this list?
So there's a whole lot of accounts with names like God Bless DJ Trump, Classy Girl for DJT, Little Ms. Trump, Donard Trump. There's a lot of clearly organic Trump followers in this thing. There's Trump Dyke is another one.
I'd love to get her on my show. Do you have an email address for her? She sounds cool.
I do. Yeah, I'll forward that on to you. Okay. Then there's some that are just silly. There's at Shit Zone was one of them. There's a whole bunch of these sites. There was a site called at Holborn Lols, which was a sort of British satirical site. It's basically like one of these sort of spoof wind-up sites, right? And then there's a whole bunch of real people that I had to, contact them to figure that out. There's like a British filmmaker in there. There's a refugee who lives in Canada. There's a 73-year-old grandmother in Florida. Like there's all these people. There are accounts that are missing, that have been suspended. There are some Russian accounts in there. A lot of them are, affiliated with RT. There's like 36 out of the 644 that were created in Russia. But the bulk of them are Western accounts, overwhelmingly American, Canadian, and British, and they're real people.
One of the realities is that, sometimes I would write an article critical of the United States government, and RT would publish, or not publish, but promote the article that I had written. Like they often promote critics of the United States government, and the assumption of this list is that if RT is promoting your story, it means you somehow are pushing a Kremlin-linked theme, when actually all you're doing is the job of a journalist, which is to criticize the CIA or the FBI or the administration. And of course, RT has an interest in then promoting that, just like the United States constantly promotes media outlets criticizing the Russian government or the Chinese government or the Iranian government. But I want to ask you about the role of the media, because they began kind of, sardonically noting that I'm sure most of them are ignoring it. Tons of people in the media have all but explicitly said from the very first time you appeared with your first installment, they thought this story should be ignored, that you weren't a real journalist, it was all a nothing burger. They kind of instructed their flock to ignore it. And part of it is, I do think it's jealousy. They're angry that you've gotten such an important story when they don't think you're legitimate. They think that belongs to them. But in reality, a lot of what you're exposing is wrongdoing by these media corporations. That's such a big part of why they want this to be ignored. What was the role that the media played in promoting and legitimizing this obvious fraud?
I think the media had an enormous role in this, because, in fact, my guess, and it's not really based on anything except the sort of public tenor of people like Clint Watts and Jonathan Morgan and Laura Rosenberger as time went on. They seemed to be a little bit less enthusiastic. I think they were a little shocked by how much the media picked up the ball and ran with this thing. The sheer quantity of stories that came out of Hamilton 68 may have been a surprise to them, is my guess, right? Because the number is just astronomical. And if you go back and look, you'll find it's about almost every conceivable kind of topic. It's not limited to Trump or Russia. It's about the hashtag walk away movement. It's about Tulsi Gabbard's campaign. It's about the Parkland shooting, some online spat with Laura Ingraham. There are dozens of stories that Hamilton 68 got involved with. And then you see there were reporters like Kevin Drum, who I thought was a pretty good writer, actually, at one point. But he, there's a story at Mother Jones where he just sort of says, here's what Russian trolls are promoting today. Right, so it's so obvious that it's like, I don't have anything to write about today, so I'm just going to go over to the Hamilton 68 dashboard, and he picks out a graph, and it shows that Tucker Carlson's the leading search for whatever that day, right? And he says Russians really love Tucker Carlson. That's his line. That's what passed for journalism during this period, right? You went over to the site, and the thing that's amazing to me, Glenn, and I'm sure you have the same thought, is if anybody came to me with this and said, I have a magic machine that tracks Russian bots, my first question is going to be, okay, well, what's in that box of yours? So like,
how does
show
it work?
me how this thing works.
How does it work? Yeah.
How does it work? Right. Like, I mean, I'm interested. If it works, I'll do the story. I don't care. Right. But the moment they say, oh, I can't show you that because the moment we do, the Russians are going to shut it down, I'll be like, thanks but no thanks. You know what I mean? You'd walk away from that, wouldn't you?
Matt, the thing is, like, when I was preparing to do the show, I was wanting to get some examples of how much the media relied on it. And my team started yelling at me. They were like, look, if you're going to just keep doing this, it's going to be the entire show with you doing nothing but reading headlines. Because the thing about it wasn't like they would just mention it. They would build entire stories around it. It wasn't like just Kevin Drum, what you said, like, oh, I have nothing to write about. The New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, CNN, they would do entire segments that had no purpose other than to say, here's what the Russians are trying to make Americans believe. And their only source, Matt, the only source, the entire story was based on whatever this graph from Hamilton 68 shoved down their throat. And I honestly don't think we have even come close to confronting what an incredible systemic failure there was on the part of the media throughout this entire Russiagate hysteria, from publishing everything the CIA and the FBI and Homeland Security told them to say anonymously, to swallowing every single scam and fraud that appeared and building their entire news narrative around it. And now they're, so angry and confused by why nobody trusts them. But let me ask you about the people behind it, because that was part of the reporting that you did. I mean, that to me is one of the really interesting parts of it. So talk about who it was who kind of got together and decided to do this.
I mean, if you look at the advisory council for the Alliance for Securing Democracy, it's a little bit like the trailer for the Addams Family movie. I mean, it's got like every spook in America on there. It's Mike Chertoff, Mike McFaul, who I knew personally in Russia, John Podesta's in there, Bill Kristol, the former deputy head of the NSA, Mike Morell, the former acting head of the CIA, who was going to be Hillary's CIA chief, David Kramer, who's the guy, if you remember, he's the guy who delivered the Steele dossier to John McCain. There's just all these creepy characters in there. They're all a lot of them are from the intelligence world. And it's hard to look at this and then look at Hamilton 68, which is fronted by this former FBI counterintelligence agent, who by all accounts is a very sweet guy. I feel bad about it in a way, but But it's hard to look at it and not have a lot of questions about what this thing really is. Like, I would really like to learn a lot more about the genesis of this project, because there's no way to look at it and not see it as something very unnatural. Let's put it that way.
Let me give you my theory about that, and I'm interested in hearing what you think. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.